oh boy, it was like a snowball effect, and it just got better and better. And I was just so blown away after all these years of things not working that I dropped everything and decided to retrain. And it was a real leap of faith.
So I'd like to welcome today Kate Hoyle. So Kate Hoyle is a clinical hypnotherapist specializing in helping teenagers overcome anxiety and low self-esteem. Having lived through the impact of her own daughter's mental issues, she decided to reach out and create change for other teenagers. Kate is also an advanced rapid transformational therapist and believes that you can truly fix a problem. Kate is also an advanced rapid transformational therapist and believes that you can't truly fix a problem until you go back to the root cause to find out what caused it in the first place. So welcome, Kate. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Lovely to see you, Tiffani.
So Kate and I actually met because we underwent the same training in London to learn rapid transformational therapy. And the unique thing about that therapy is, as you said, it gets to the root cause of what is driving that anxiety, that low self-esteem in the subconscious mind. So tell me more about what prompted your decision to become a therapist yourself.
So it was born out of my daughter's experience. So she was diagnosed with severe anxiety and depression at the tender age of 12. And she spent years under therapy, CAMS, which is the Child and Mental Health Service in the UK. And the poor girl, as soon as I heard about anything that had worked for somebody else or a new therapy that was brilliant, I would take her off here, there, and everywhere. But just like nothing was working. And we were actually going down a really serious dark spiral. And then I came across Marissa Peer, who's the founder of Rapid Transformational Therapy. And I just liked what she was saying, because she was saying, you know, people shouldn't be in therapy for years. You should get in there. You should find out where the problem came from. You should fix them and set them free. And I was like, yes, exactly. This is what we're after. So I found someone to work with my daughter. And funnily enough, instantly, I was like, oh, that's something else that hasn't worked. But then as the days and the weeks and the months like went on, it was kind of like, oh, hang on a minute. Like, you know, she's getting into school and she's actually gone out and she's met those friends. And as you know, some people have that instant transformation and other people it's cumulative. And for her, it was definitely cumulative. But then, oh boy, it was like a snowball effect, and it just got better and better. And I was just so blown away after all these years of things not working that I dropped everything and decided to retrain. And it was a real leap of faith, because I thought, I don't even know if I'm going to be any good at this thing. I mean, I'm from corporate finance and law. How am I going to be a therapist? But I think like really early on, the first few days, I'm like, oh no, absolutely. This is what I want to do. And just, I love it. Absolutely love it.
Oh, and it's so interesting because I came into this for the same reason, literally, a little bit different, but one of my daughters was struggling with OCD at around the age of 12 as well. And it went on for a couple of years. Nothing was really working. And now I didn't find rapid transformational therapy at that time, but what I did find was Jeffrey Schwartz out in California. But the thing that he taught was that because the brain is neuroplastic, capable of changing, capable of developing new thought patterns, that OCD could actually be fixed. And that's probably, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but it worked for my daughter. And, but it was about creating change within the brain. And so I learned at that point that things that they tell you can't be fixed could be fixed. And so it did take about 6 months for her. and she underwent this brain retraining program. So I learned the brain could be retrained, and then I became absolutely obsessed with learning about neuroplasticity. And as well, I was motivated. I suffered from anxiety, depression, myself, and a lot of childhood trauma. So we met actually in London. We've been friends ever since, and we've been on the same career path, you in the UK and myself in the US. But it's been interesting because even in the last 5 years since I started doing this, I have seen that anxiety and depression, especially among young people and young adults, is trending upward. I think COVID really pushed that in the wrong direction, but it was trending upwards prior to that. Mm-hmm. And then now it seems to just like exponentially be rising. And so I work primarily with anxiety. You work primarily with anxiety with teenagers. And so what do you think, as far as you're looking around, what do you think is driving this rapid rate? I think they've said that anxiety and depression is up by as high as 58%.
Yeah, and in the UK, I think the latest research was around 56%, and it's just COVID is definitely a factor in that. I think that's what saw the huge rise. And there's, all sorts of things there, lack of social connection and just that underlying worry that something's not right. But I think, there are so many issues now that it's the fast pace, they're under constant pressure. And I remember when I was at school, you had an argument with someone and the most you would do is you would call them or your best friend that evening, and then nothing else would happen until you went to school the next day. Now you have 30, 50 people wading in on that argument all night long. And it's just this bombardment. And I think because it's a great thing that their world has expanded, their worlds are so much bigger than mine was growing up. But it just creates that awareness. But that awareness also is around what's wrong with the world and these disasters and climate change and, what's going to happen to me. Is there going to be a planet for me to live on when I'm older? And oh, what should I be doing with my life? I mean, I had one girl, she said to me, I don't know what my purpose is. I was like, you're 15. Of course you don't know what your purpose is. I didn't find my purpose till I was 50. So, there's just this constant pressure and just too much. There's just too much going on, I think.
Well, I think I loved some of the writings of Hannah Hayne, and she terms it hyper novelty. That throughout human history, what great grandma did was what grandma did, was what mom did, was what you did, with very little change. And the change is occurring so rapidly. These young people are bombarded with a lot of scary information. And a lot of that information you would never have heard about or known about, with things that they're not necessarily mature enough, or their brain is not developed enough to even handle. I mean, just think alone about the threat of the earth is going to be extinguished through climate change. I had on the podcast a couple weeks ago a climate change analyst, and I liked him because he had a positive perspective. He talked about solutions. So the topic was helping parents help their children deal with, climate change and world event anxiety. But even as adults, it can be a struggle, but it's not just climate change. It's the constant environment within social media. You're exposed to everything bad that's going on in the world is available. As soon as you get on social media, you are hearing about all of these terrible world events. You're seeing people over in the Ukraine, in battle. You're seeing people in harm's way. You're hearing about child trafficking. That's a huge anxiety for a lot of my clients. You're hearing about climate change. And then on top of all that, you're being constantly exposed to what I call the standard and the standard of beauty, the standard of success, the standard of who you need to be. And it's not even a real standard. You know, the standard of beauty is filtered. The standard of success is given out piecemeal. You don't see the struggle that it took to get there. And so these kids are developing a worldview that isn't even accurate, that tells them you're never enough. You don't look good enough. You don't have enough. You're not smart enough. That seems to be a message that no one's giving out intentionally, but that's just the message that these kids are getting, inadvertently through the media, basically. And it's really, really sad. It really breaks my heart to see. So what do you think is the most significant factor of all? If you had to pinpoint the most significant factor that you've seen increase the anxiety in young people, what are the kids that you're working with talking about the most?
Sadly, bullying is still a big issue. I work with quite a few neurodiverse people, and there was that sense that they were different. So they go through school, and something that I get so worked up about is that as soon as you're identified as different in school, it's interpreted as less than. And so even if a child is identified as being super smart or really fantastic at one area, as soon as they're treated differently, there's that interpretation by the child, oh, there's something wrong with me.
And
I'm different, there's something wrong.
That's interesting you brought that up. So one thing that I have noticed, and this is both with adults and teenagers who have anxiety, is there is a trend, I think, that people with anxiety, and the more severe the anxiety, the more I'm noticing that they tend to be very, very smart. They tend to be very intelligent. I've had quite a few adults come in to see me who are actually in Mensa, which is that organization for very high IQ. And I see these young people even come in, and the kind of vocabulary they're using, the kind of thought processes they're having, it's like they are neurodiverse, but it's actually such a good thing. I mean, these are the future inventors, and they're the game changers in the world. And they tend to struggle with anxiety because instead of just focusing on the present moment and just being a kid, they're grappling with these huge existential questions, and they're piecing together theories based on all the stuff that their mind is analyzing. They tend to be very curious, inquisitive, intuitive. And I think, and then it's so sad because they come to the conclusion that I'm broken. I'm defective. I have something's wrong with my brain. I have anxiety. One of the messages I try to get across is actually you have an awesome brain, that this brain is actually an asset. We just need to learn to train that brain.
Exactly.
Now, do you think that young men are being affected as much and with anxiety now as the girls? Because we all know that the girls, they really suffer a lot when they look at the social media. They're making the comparisons. They're the ones that seem to struggle with eating disorders the most. But what are you seeing in teenage boys right now?
I'm seeing exactly the same. I see pretty much 50-50 with all my clients, male, female, and it's just the same pressures. The same body image issues, because, now the marketing people have decided that, oh, hang on, now we've got a fantastic new market. We can market beauty products to men because, they're really worried about the way they look. So, they go to the gym. But most of the people that I work with, the young people I work with, it's this anxiety and this pressure they put on themselves. And the other thing that's very common is this perfectionist. And I think that's a real tendency of the overthinkers and the very bright people. And, for example, I work with a young guy, and he just was about to drop out of university. And it just all came too much. And he'd he'd excelled in high school in science, and he became the science guy. And then as he was moving on through his education, he wasn't the science guy anymore because he was going into, physics, yes, but he wasn't the top person in his college in physics. And he's suddenly like, I don't know who I am. And the only way I ever got validation was to be top and to be the science guy and to be known for that. And he was just completely lost, and he was burning himself out because he was just working so hard to try and keep at the top rather than accept, like, what do I have to do to get through this and the grades I want? He was just pushing himself way, way too hard. And so I do think the boys have just the same issues as the girls. And it's easy to think about girls and body image, but I'm seeing that definitely transfer to boys as well. And the same pressures. And, I've got to earn lots of money, and I'm not successful unless I'm wealthy. And, you talk to children and quite young, and you'll say, what do you want to do when you grow up? And they'll go, I want to be a YouTuber. And, in our generation, it's kind of like, yeah, that doesn't seem like such a profession. And of course, some of the young kids are making an absolute fortune, but that's a very, very small percentage.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny because, previous generations, you lived in a tighter knit community. And you would look around and you'd see all these professions in action. And then you'd think, that interests me, But now they're not exposed to that broad range. And so they feel lost and don't know what to do. And like you mentioned earlier, I've seen a lot of people who come in, and mostly I see adults, but they've come in and so I'm 24. I don't want to do with my life. And they're depressed. They're depressed. And I think, why do you have to figure it out? Because my friends, they're finishing college and starting their career, and they feel like a loser. That's the message, that you're a loser unless you fit this criteria. But there is, and then one of the things that I talk about a lot is there is no standard, and there's no one identity that you have to choose. And people seem to think their identity is this thing that I've held, like this young man you're talking about. I've been the science guy. Well, you might stop being the science guy when you go to university, or you could actually choose to stop being the science guy. That we don't actually have a fit identity like Marissa teaches. Our identity is based largely on our beliefs, and those beliefs can shift, because I could have the identity that I'm stupid. Mm-hmm. That identity will not serve me well. That identity will hold me back. And you see all of these young people that have developed these restrictive identities, identities that are, as you're looking at them, are going to keep them from being happy. And so part of what we do is to help them break free from those restrictive identities and then adopt a truly healthy identity. Because the identity really is in flux based on what we believe about ourselves, about the world, about life, and there's so many cultural changes occurring, and they're occurring so rapidly that, in a 5-year period, the identity that the culture is pushing you towards can completely change. So you were cool 5 years ago. Now you're not cool. And then if and it just switches constantly. Now, and I think there's a lot going in within the family unit now. I think families are really struggling. There's economic pressures, there's cultural pressures, there's COVID was a huge pressure. So how do you see those changes within the family affecting young people?
I think, again, it's going back to pace. It's such a fast pace of change that it's really difficult for parents to keep up. And it is a very different model. Like when I was growing up, there was one TV in one room. So everyone knew what I was watching. There were no mobile phones. But now the kids will tend to go into their own rooms and have access to pretty much whatever they want, 24/7. they've got their gaming. The parents don't really know what they're seeing, what they're viewing, what they're doing. And it's this isolation. And I think that's what's happened to the family unit. It's everyone's become fragmented. And we don't really know what the children are being exposed to. And I think that is a real difficulty. And it's very difficult for a parent these days to just keep up. We used to be able to say, oh, you don't think I know what it was like to be your age. And of course I do, but we don't. Mm. It's so different. We understand some of the emotional changes, physical changes, but we don't know what it's like to be a teenager in today's world. And like you say, it just changes so much. And I think basic things like family meal times. Everyone's so busy. Everyone's doing their own timetable. Everyone's, grabbing some food. I cannot emphasize enough the value of family meal times. Like when you do actually, all the devices get down. There's no TV, and you actually have those discussions, because if you have those discussions around a meal table, you take away the pressure. You get to learn what the kids are doing. I mean, our kids used to have conversations. We had no idea what they were talking about, but we would pick up names and, the things that I'd then heard of, which I could have conversations with them about, and just hearing their views. Most of the kids, they're just so smart. And they know a lot, and just gives them an opportunity to express themselves. We do not know everything. We're not always right. And that's often a big shock for parents. But yeah, I think the family unit has had, a big impact actually.
Yeah. And you're right. I think I heard a statistic that only like 5 to 10% of families, and I don't know if that's the exact statistic, actually sit down and have a family dinner. And I'm sure the UK and the US seem to just parallel one another when it comes to what the culture is doing. Mm-hmm. So I imagine it's the same over there. And then parents are just so busy. Mm-hmm. 60 years ago, most mothers were still at home. And now, due to economic pressures and career decisions, you now still have to do a lot of that, what you had to do. You still have to be a parent. And it's just a mad rush. And then kids have sporting events and they have social events, and parents are just running around trying to keep up. But making that connection time a priority, because it's really all about connection. That's what you're doing at that family meal time. That's so much more important than whether you prepare, a big fancy meal or anything.
Oh yeah, like that's got nothing to do with it. Yeah.
And this is what I hear so often, and what I've seen is often, a kid gets in trouble and then the parent says, I had absolutely no idea my kid was using drugs. Or that my kid was in with that group of kids, or my kid was struggling with depression. And I've even had parents say to me, I never suspected my son would commit suicide because
that's very common.
I thought he was okay. And they don't understand why the kid's not reaching out. And I'm certainly not blaming any parent at all, but it's not the parent. It's this incredibly fragmented society we live in, and we have to be more proactive against that. Like I was talking with a young parent in the sauna the other day, and he was telling me how he had these small children. And I said, I admire you because you have to be 75% better parent than someone did 30 years ago just to make a strong connection with your kid. So there are definite challenges that we are facing in today's society in parenting. So when you meet a kid that's struggling, how do you help the parents to assist their kid in their recovery from anxiety?
I think a lot of it is just explaining what's going on for that child. And it's quite often the parent misunderstands their role. So they think their role is to push the child to be the best they can be. And a typical example of this is school. Mm-hmm. So the parent will say, but they have to be in school. I have to make sure they're in school because they need to get those exams. And a big game changer for me with my daughter and our relationship was to step back and stop parenting according to other people's needs and start parenting according to her needs. Because if your child's mental health is not good, they cannot learn and they will not learn. And it is the only thing that you need to get right first. It's the only priority. So yes, of course, school wants them there. And yes, everyone expects them to fit into this nice timetable of when they take their exams. It honestly doesn't matter. It matters a lot for the child because they haven't got the perspective. Us as adults have perspective. And I think that's the greatest thing we can give our children, is that it's not always going to be like this. And as they grow, they will have choices and options, and they do not have to do something at a certain age. And that's a big role for the parents. So I think a lot of times the parents were like me, and this is why I like supporting parents. I felt so lost and helpless. I did not know what to do. I didn't know how to help my daughter. And I was spent years on eggshells because I didn't want to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing. And I only knew I'd done the wrong thing once I'd done it, and had all the fallout. And so it's a really lonely place. And I don't want other parents to have to go through that. And even when she was going into therapy, she would disappear into the room. Fine. I don't want to know what's going on in that conversation. But then the only conversation with me was to book the next appointment. And I'm like, hang on, I'm the primary caregiver for the next 7 days until she comes back. And I have no idea what I'm supposed to do to help my child. And so I think a lot of it is just reassuring the parents that change is possible, opening up conversations and really changing things to what does my child need right now.
And don't you think a lot of parents suffer from a lot of guilt? Because there's this message, if you do the parenting thing right, you're going to have this happy, emotionally stable kid. But there's a lot of other influences out there. And we're all doing the best we can with the knowledge we have. And parents sometimes bring their own parenting ideas or even trauma and baggage into the situation. And then when they see their kids struggling, they instantly begin pointing the finger back at themselves.
And so does everybody else.
Yeah. And so they feel like, I've got to fix this because I caused this, so I got to fix it. And there becomes this desperation to fix my kid. And what they're actually doing is putting more pressure onto the kid to, you better straighten out, and if the kid knew how to straighten out and stop being anxious and depressed, they would do that because it's not fun. It's not fun at all. So talk a little bit about how you help these young people to overcome anxiety, depression. What's different about what you do and the therapy that your daughter was in for multiple years that didn't help?
Well, I think she was predominantly using talking therapies, and it would literally be that. She'd say, look, Mum, I've had someone to talk to, but it hasn't fixed anything. And you can talk and talk and talk, but as we said right from the beginning, my view is unless you can go back and find out where the problem came from, you can't really fix it. And a lot of the work that we do is about getting that understanding for the client. So we may understand what's going on, but it's really important that they understand, because once they've got that awareness and that understanding, and they're like, oh, that's why I feel like that, that's when you can move on to change. So once you've identified where it comes from and the client has really, really understood, that's when we can move on to changing the way they think about those old, experiences, because you can only interpret an experience at the age you are at that point. So a child has an experience, and they can only interpret it with all their knowledge and understanding at that point. And then when they're a bit older, you can go back, well, of course you needed to feel like that when you were 6. You had no choice. You couldn't fix something. You wanted to, but you weren't able to. And so that's the reframing of now you would know what to do in that situation, or you would be able to have a voice, or, whatever it is in those circumstances. And only when we've done all that work do we put in the good stuff. And I'm sure you're the same. One of the things I love about working with hypnosis is that it makes you really receptive to good suggestion. And so once we've figured everything out, reframed it, think of it differently, then you can put the good stuff in. And that goes back to neuroplasticity. When we used to think that everything was just fixed, and now we understand that no, these neural connections can be changed. And that is so exciting because, it gives everyone the hope that anything can be changed at any age.
And that's kind of not the message that a lot of therapists are giving. I know there's some good therapists out there, but my own personal experience in therapy was I went to probably 5 therapists total. The first 4, it was all talking therapy. And now looking back, I feel strongly that as I went in week after week and I'm just talking about the problem, I'm rehearsing the problem, I'm almost I am wiring that problem deeper into my subconscious mind. I'm rehearsing the same thinking patterns that are leading to my anxiety and depression to begin with. And so I think that is a huge difference in what we do as opposed to traditional talk therapy. I'm not saying that talk therapy never helps, but I think the problem is, some people that have come see me say, I really did get help from some psychotherapy. But a lot of people come to me and say, I've been in therapy this many years and it hasn't helped. And then what ends up happening is they now have developed this identity that I am hopelessly defective. Mm-hmm. And some of them, I hate to say it, some of them are even being told that your anxiety and depression is genetic because, your mom was depressed, or that there's something wrong with your brain. And the interesting thing is, I think one of the most freeing things that I've been able to convey is that there's nothing wrong with your brain. It doesn't need to be fixed. Your brain is reacting to whatever it is. If they're afraid of driving, if they're afraid, if it's a young person afraid to go to school, if they're afraid of relationships, your brain thinks that stuff is not safe for you. So therefore, your brain is going to continue to send you anxiety until it learns that you're going to be okay in these situations. And that belief that these situations, circumstances are not safe is very much hardwired into the subconscious. And by using conscious therapies and standing in front of the mirror and saying affirmations, the kid is looking in the mirror and going, my therapist told me to say I'm beautiful. I'm beautiful. And then the kid's brain is going, no, you're ugly. Look at that nose. You're ugly. And then the kid just feels deflated. That's a heck of a lot for a 12, 13, 14-year-old to be able to handle. So when you could go back and find out where did this belief even come from? Where did the kid get the belief that they're stupid or ugly? Or I had a girl recently, I can't talk. She just thought, I can't say anything interesting. I'm boring. That comes from an event. And it turned out that came from, some boy at school saying, everything you say is so stupid. You're so boring. As an adult, that affects us. But we have a greater tendency to let that stuff bounce off. But these kids' brains are developing. They're developing their whole identity. And so these things that impact them have so much greater and lasting effects. And then it's kind of like pulling the weeds of insecurity and false beliefs out of their mind. And then, as you said, we can plant into their mind now the truth about who they are and their true potential. So when you're doing hypnosis with young people and you found that root cause and then you've reframed that, shifted their perspective, what are the kinds of empowering beliefs that you now, give to this child under hypnosis that they can accept and it can empower them?
I mean, the biggest thing is getting them to appreciate that they are fine, just the way they are. And there's this idea that they're unique and that's okay, because, you know, we all went through childhood, and what's the burning thing? I've got to be the same as everybody else because I've got to fit in. But then as you get older, you have this more sense of identity, and it's just making them realize that it doesn't matter what anybody else said, what anyone else made them feel. They are designed to be the way they are. There is only one person on the planet exactly like them, and that is on purpose. And that's okay. And it doesn't matter what they do or what they look like or anything else. Fundamentally, inside, they are okay. And building self-esteem is the number one factor in all of this, because once you truly feel okay about yourself from the inside, the outside doesn't affect you so much. It doesn't have the power. We don't need to give other people the agency to tell us how we feel, because if you get that secure, and I always say it starts from within. And to me, self-esteem is like the foundations. It's like building a house. If you don't get the foundations right, cracks are going to appear in the wall. And so with these young people, you just get them to the point where they go, yeah, actually, I'm okay just the way I am, is really, really empowering. And also the other thing is understanding that the thoughts they have are generated by them. They kind of had this notion that thoughts come from somewhere, and, you know, oh, these thoughts, and I have no power of my thoughts, and they're their thoughts. And if they have created the bad thought, they can create a good thought, or they can change that thought. And that is, most of them just find that completely mind blowing. Like, why that isn't taught in schools, I've no idea, because the fact that you do not have to be plagued by these thoughts. Because I remember talking about other therapies. I remember talking to somebody who'd been through lots of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And that's very much, to me, it's more of a coping mechanism. It's kind of like, and he says, yeah, I've got so good now. I can recognize the thought. I can trap the thought, and then I can do something with that thought. And I was like, okay, what if you didn't have that thought in the first place? And you're like, whoa, how is that possible? And so, you know, he, going back again, he had been ingrained into thinking you're always going to have these negative thoughts. You're always going to have this feeling, but we can help you manage it. And you and I were like, no, we want to go right back. And then we want to make sure you have different positive thoughts in the first place.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of a transformational hypnosis is it's about not just like with regular therapy, often you do develop an understanding of here's how I got from A to B. Here's how why I have anxiety. It was these events from my past. You know, here's why I'm depressed. It's these circumstances. So we have an understanding. Now that's helpful because instead of feeling like I'm just a total loser or a weak person, they say, okay, I have compassion on myself. But that's nice if you understand it, but you don't, you know, your brain needs to think about it differently. So it's about removing what's driving that anxiety and depression. But then why not completely shift that? Because right now, when you're in that state where your life is being governed by all these thoughts and you're being told that you have no way to shift them, you feel weak, you feel disempowered, and you feel kind of like a victim. And you have no sense of agency. So now let's shift that. And that's what's so wonderful about working with the subconscious mind is you can actually create a shift in the way people think. And so after you work with kids, what kind of changes are you seeing in their anxiety and depression?
It's just incredible. I mean, I've literally, the number of people I've kept in university, you know, they've managed to either stay or go back to finish their degrees. One person I worked with is now doing masters, planning to do PhD, and he had been like, he'd had to come home because he couldn't cope anymore. With the younger ones, it's literally most of them, they just can't get into school. When they come to me, they can't get into school. And they're just back on track because one of the biggest things I think I build up in them is resilience. I get very frustrated with this idea that they sometimes buy into, that I'm supposed to be happy. Yeah, it's great. We want you to be as happy as much as possible. But if you think that's what life is like, you are going to have a really horrible wake-up call. So rather than have the aim of making kids happy all the time, we should make them resilient, because things happen. Life goes wrong. And the most empowering thing you can have is to know, do you know what? I'm okay. I'm fine as me. And I will cope with whatever life throws at me. Because if you've got those two things.
Important. That is extremely important, what you just said, because the one thing I see with anxiety clients is they have a list of things, if they wrote them down on a paper. And about this list, they tell themselves one thing, or, or things that have the same theme. I can't stand it if this happens. I won't be able to cope if this happens. I'm just going to die if this happens. And so these are the things that they don't believe they're enough to handle. So just shifting that one belief to, I can handle these things, that I'm actually a strong person, that my problems have a solution and I'm smart enough to find them, is huge. And you can make those shifts in kids. It doesn't have to be an adult that shifts these thinking patterns. The shifting them at the age of kids you're working with, 12, 13, 14, 15, they are being spared from the consequences of lack of confidence and self-esteem. And I have said to parents, the most important gift that you can give your child is confidence, because Absolutely. It will determine the entire trajectory of their life, from the kind of relationship they get in. Women who have self-confidence are generally not getting in relationships and allowing themselves to be abused. People that have self-confidence are generally not picking a job when they have this dream, this vision of what they really want to do, but they're holding back. I'm just not good enough to do that. Confidence gives you the ability to create the kind of life that is going to be truly satisfying for you. And so it's so important. And so for parents to make sure their kids have that confidence now, saves them so much grief. I look at my life, and I'm sure you could look at yours, and think, how would my life have been different if I had gotten confidence in my teens, in my 20s, in my 30s, or even in my early 40s? It wasn't until I actually went and started learning about the subconscious mind that I was able to actually become a confident person. Even in my early 40s, I was not a confident person. And I had done lots of self-help books, lots of therapy, lots of stuff, and I still was pretty miserable until I began to realize that the problem is rooted in the subconscious mind. That's where it has to be addressed. It's where it has to be addressed. And is there anything special? I think a lot of parents would be listening and saying, is hypnosis really safe for my kid? And how young, can my child be hypnotized? So address that for a minute.
Well, actually, it's a perfectly natural state. So we tend to think that hypnosis is someone doing something to somebody else. And we suffer from the image of stage hypnosis, which is something very different to what we do. But what we're doing is we're working with that person. We can't do anything to somebody else. You cannot make someone do or think something that they don't want to. So you and I, when we're working with clients, we sometimes say, right, repeat this, because we're changing the way they've thought about an event. And if you use a word or some language that they don't resonate with, they'll just change it automatically without even thinking. They'll just repeat the sentence with different words. And if anyone has ever been so engrossed in a movie or reading a book that they jump when their phone goes or somebody comes to the door, that's hypnotic trance. We go in and out of hypnotic trance all the time. The number of times that you can have the same journey to work, and then one day you think, I must take a detour because I've got to post something somewhere. And you end up at work and you go, I completely forgot, because you're just on autopilot. And that's hypnotic trance, because If we had to run our lives purely on our conscious minds, we'd never get anything done, because we'd be constantly thinking, okay, I have to put my left foot and then my right foot and my left foot and my right foot. And to eat, I have to pick up this knife and I have to pick up this fork and I have to cut. All of that is like the subconscious is running 95% of the day. Thank goodness, because it allows us to do more interesting things. And so that's all we're doing. Hypnosis is a really relaxed state. It's a natural state. It's a relaxed state. It allows the body to relax, but the mind is actually very focused. And so it allows someone to cut out that critical, logical part of their brain and just concentrate on what it is that we want to focus on. And I just find
that's why their minds can absorb those positive, empowering suggestions, so readily. And then also both of us also provide our clients with recordings. So not only do you begin that empowering process, but the child is listening to that recording for 21, 30 days, however long. And so it's being hardwired, this new confident way of thinking. And I think what scares a lot of people is they look at the subconscious mind as some weird, eerie, deep place in the mind. But really, the subconscious is where we keep all our well-learned behaviors. So you used the example earlier of driving a car, and you're so used to driving that now you can think about all sorts of other things, and so you drive right past the exit because your mind is so used to going to work because that is the route you most frequently drive. And so our minds were the same way. We end up defaulting to these negative, disempowering ways of thinking because that is the direction the brain is used to going in. And so that's what we're really doing with transformational hypnosis is we're breaking that pattern of going in that same direction that is not serving you, and kids don't even really understand that so much. They don't know why they feel so bad about themselves. They don't know why they're so scared to go to school. And that's the one thing I'm sure you've noticed, and you work with way more teenagers than I do. But a lot of times you ask a kid, why do you not want to go to school? And they'll look right at you and go, I don't know.
Oh, I had that with my daughter all the time. I'd go, what's wrong? What's worrying you? She went, I don't know. I don't know. And
they don't.
No, they don't. And their logical mind doesn't allow them. I'll tell you one exercise I do, particularly with girls that are suffering from a lot of negative self-talk. I give them a piece of paper and a pen. And I say, I want you to write down all the things that you say to yourself on a regular basis. And they start writing and they write and they write and they write. And then I go, okay, say those things to me. And they go, no, I can't. You go, well, why not? They go, because it's too awful. I was like, what if it's too awful to say to me? Why are you saying it to yourself? And they're so used to that negative self-talk that they're not even aware they're doing it.
Yeah.
And I have a phrase that I use with, doesn't matter what age I'm dealing with, whether it's teenagers, adults, be kind to yourself. We're very, very harsh on ourselves. And that bit of compassion, that bit of kindness, because we're doing the best we can go a long way.
Yeah, it sure can. Well, it's been absolutely great talking to you. We're just about out of time, Kate, but tell people how, if they want to get in contact with you, if they have a teenage daughter or son, how do they get in contact with you so that they can find out more about the therapy that you offer and how they can work with you?
I mean, pretty much you put Kate Hoyle hypnotherapy into Google, into social media. The only tricky bit of that is Hoyle, which is Hoyle, but I'm on pretty much every social media platform except TikTok. And my website is katehoylehypnotherapy.com.
And didn't you win an award recently?
I did. Thank you.
Tell me about that real quick. I don't want to leave.
Well, it's just, I've won Hypnotherapist of the Year in London, UK, which is just incredible. Yeah, it was a huge honor and a huge surprise. It wasn't something that I was expecting, but yeah, it's been really exciting to win that.
All right. So if you're looking for someone to work with your teenager now, some people might be saying to themselves, well, I'd love to work with you, Kate, but we don't live in the UK. So how can you help my son or daughter? Can you help someone on Zoom?
Right. So I think one of us froze.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I see that it says my internet connection is unstable. So I'm just going to backtrack because Erica will cut that out. So if someone is living in the US or another country and they would like to work with you or want you to work with their son or daughter, can they still do that even though they don't live near London?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I work with people all around the world, and what's amazing, I couldn't believe this when we were training, that this works online just as well as it does in person. And it's often a benefit, I think, because people are more relaxed. They don't have to find a venue. They don't have to get somewhere on time. The younger people often like being in their own environment. They're so used to doing everything online now, especially after COVID. So yeah, it's a joy that we can do this anywhere in the world.
Yeah, and I always tell people, your eyes are closed most of the time anyway. So what's the difference if you're in the room with me or you're on Zoom? It's the words that are being spoken to you and you listening and visualizing that's having the beneficial effect. So it's great talking to you, Kate, and bye-bye.
Oh, bye. Lovely seeing you again, Tiffani.
You too. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of a Transformed Life podcast. I hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and entertaining. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the podcast so you never miss out on future episodes. I cover a variety of topics to help you transform your mind, health, and relationships. If you found this episode helpful or entertaining, please take a moment to leave me a rating and review on your preferred podcast platform. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me to reach more listeners who could benefit from this content. Lastly, I love hearing from my listeners, so please reach out to me on Instagram, Twitter, and even TikTok with your thoughts, feedback, or ideas for future episodes. Your input helps me to make better content and build a community around this podcast. So thank you again for tuning in, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you.